Welcome, dear friends, to The Curious Case. I'm Davis, and it's always a joy to share another quiet evening with you. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Outside, the village bells have begun to toll steady, calm, familiar. But tonight, one bell rings with a story of its own, a mystery hidden in its echo, waiting to be heard. Shall we begin? The morning began quietly. Soft light pressed through lace curtains. A kettle hummed on the stove. Miss Marple measured her tea leaves, 2 for the pot, 1 for luck. The village was still half asleep. Only the milk cart clattered on the lane. The air carried that gentle scent of dew and soap from freshly scrubbed doorsteps. Routine, calm, predictable. She took her cup to the garden bench. The roses bowed with last night's rain. A thrush hopped between the cabbages, tilting its head as if listening to secrets. Miss Marple smiled. "We all keep them, don't we?" she murmured. From the church came a faint bell, a slow, lazy chime marking 8. The sound drifted through the air like warm bread from the bakery. She loved that hour before the village fully woke, before gossip stirred. Mrs. Bantry would be polishing her silver by now. Dr. Haydock's boy would already be late for school. And the baker, Mr. Krill, would be stacking his Eccles cakes in that proud window of his. Life in Street, Mary Mead, was comfortingly ordinary. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and watched a thin wisp of steam rise from her cup. It curled once, then vanished. She frowned slightly. The garden gate, usually still, had moved. A slow creak, barely a whisper, but enough. She looked up. Nothing. The lane beyond was empty except for sunlight sliding over the stones. A moment's pause. Then the gate stood still again, quiet as before. Perhaps the wind, she thought. But there was no wind. Not even the roses stirred. She finished her tea, still watching that gate. Routine, yes, but sometimes the smallest shift broke the pattern. And Miss Marple, lover of patterns, never ignored such things. Inside, the clock struck the half-hour, a sound sharp and clean against the hush. She rose, smoothing her skirt, setting her cup down precisely on the saucer. The cat from next door slipped through the hedge, tail twitching, eyes fixed on something unseen. It froze midway, then darted off, startled by nothing at all. Miss Marple turned her head toward the lane once more. Stillness, absolute. But as she stepped back toward her kitchen door, she felt it. That peculiar tingle of instinct, that faint unease she trusted more than reason. Someone had been there, watching, just long enough to know her morning habits. And though nothing moved now, Miss Marple knew something in Street Mary Mead had already changed. The lane began to stir. Shop doors clicked open one by one. Brooms swept the dust from stone steps. The sound of a bicycle bell floated through the morning air. At the bakery, Mr. Krill stacked his golden cakes in perfect lines. His wife stood beside him, counting change with a face like a ruler, straight, sharp, exact. "Smile, Arthur," she said without looking up. "Customers buy warmth, not flour." He smiled, because he always did. Across the street, Mrs. Finch arranged flowers in tin buckets. Her hands were quick, her gossip quicker. "Have you heard?" she whispered to the postmistress. "Mrs. Bartlett's niece came home in a motor car. Red one, from London." The postmistress adjusted her spectacles. "And left again last night, some say. Not alone." They both laughed softly, enjoying the taste of rumour with their morning air. Miss Marple passed them with a polite nod. "Good morning," she said. They straightened at once, guilty as schoolgirls. "Morning, Miss Marple. Fine weather for the roses," Mrs. Finch chirped. "Indeed," she said. "Though too fine for secrets, I always think. They tend to wilt in. The heat." The butcher shouted from his doorway, teasing the grocer about his prices. Children ran by, chasing a hoop that clattered against the cobbles. Ordinary sounds, comforting ones, the kind that made the village feel safe. But beneath the chatter, something felt taut. Mr. Krill's wife glanced out of the window too often. The postmistress sealed her envelopes with trembling fingers. Even Mrs. Finch, bold as brass, forgot to smile when she saw the constable walk past. The church clock struck 9. A cart rumbled toward the square. Inside sat a man in a dark coat, hat pulled low despite the warmth. Few noticed him. Those who did turned away quickly. Strangers rarely came this early. Miss Marple paused by the greengrocer's stall. She studied a crate of apples. Shiny. Perfect. But one, just one, carried a faint bruise under the skin. She tapped it lightly. Always the small marks that tell the truth, she murmured. The lane buzzed. The day moved forward. The man in the dark coat stopped outside the bakery. He checked his watch, then stepped inside. The doorbell jingled. A sound so ordinary, no one looked twice, not even Miss Marple. And yet, by dusk, that same man would be dead. It was the last morning they'd all see him alive. The peace broke like glass. A single crash. Sharp. Sudden. Then the sound of voices high, startled, confused. Miss Marple froze at her gate. The noise had come from the bakery. A teacup rolled into the street. Its handle cracked clean off. She walked faster. Not running. Never running, but quick enough to pass Mrs. Finch, who stood clutching her shopping bag to her chest. "What was that?" Mrs. Finch whispered. "Trouble," Miss Marple said softly. By the time she reached the door, a small crowd had gathered. The postmistress, the butcher's boy, all leaning in but not daring to enter. Inside silence. A terrible, heavy silence that felt wrong in a place that usually smelled of butter and laughter. Then she saw him, the man from that morning, the one in the dark coat. He sat slumped at the small tea table near the window. One arm hung limp. His hat lay at his feet. Mrs. Krill stood behind the counter, white as flour. "He just fell," she whispered. "He was eating, and he fell." Mr. Krill stumbled out of the bake room, wiping his hands. "Fetch Dr. Haydock," he cried. "Now." The butcher's boy bolted into the lane, shouting for help. Someone gasped. Someone prayed. Miss Marple stepped closer, calm amid the storm. The man's plate still held half an Eccles cake. Its sugar crust was broken, the currants gleaming. A cup of tea had spilled across the table, soaking into the cloth in a slow brown circle. Dr. Haydock arrived within minutes. His bag snapped open. His hands were steady. He checked the pulse, the eyes, the breath. Then he straightened, face grave. "Gone," he said quietly. "Too quick for pain, I think." Mrs. Krill pressed a hand to her mouth. "It must have been his heart. Poor man. It's so hot today." The inspector appeared next, notebook ready. "Natural causes," he declared before even kneeling. "Happens often enough in heat like this." Miss Marple said nothing. She stood behind him, eyes on the table. The half-eaten cake. The cup. The faint smell that didn't belong something sharp beneath the sweetness. Her gaze moved to the brush by the counter, stiff with yesterday's egg glaze. The bowl beside it was dry, and yet the cake had shone. She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing. Everyone saw a tragedy, but Miss Marple saw one thing that didn't fit. The bakery smelled too sweet. That was the first thing Miss Marple noticed. Not comforting, sweet, sharp, heavy, almost chemical. She stood by the table, hands folded neatly. The others whispered behind her. Dr. Haydock's verdict hung in the air. "Heart failure," he'd said. "Happens quickly. Nothing to be done." The inspector nodded, relieved to close the case before it began. Natural causes were tidy. Murder was not. But Miss Marple's eyes were on the cake. Half-eaten. Glazed. Too glossy. The sugar caught the light like polished glass. And that smell, it didn't belong to baking. She leaned closer, ignoring the murmurs. "Strange," she said softly. "What is Miss Marple?" the inspector asked. "This shine," she replied. "Mr. Krill uses egg wash, yes?" The baker blinked. "Of course. Brushed on before the oven. Gives the proper color." "And this one?" she asked, pointing. The bowl beside the oven was dry, the brush stiff with yesterday's residue. He hesitated. "Must have been leftover glaze." "No," she said gently. "It's different. Look how the surface gleams almost oily." The inspector sighed. "You're seeing things again, madam." "Perhaps," she said. but one should always look at the little things. Her gaze moved from the cup to the plate, then to the counter. A faint brown ring marked the white paper there. Circular. Fresh. Tea stain? The constable offered. Perhaps. But Miss Marple's mind was already turning. A ring like that came from a bottle. A small one. She straightened, hands clasped. "Tell me, Inspector," she said quietly. "Will there be an examination?" He shook his head. "Waste of time. It's clear enough." Miss Marple nodded once. "Clear cases," she murmured, "often hide the cloudiest truths." The crowd began to disperse. Mrs. Finch whispered that she'd never seen such a thing. The postmistress crossed herself. Mr. Krill locked the shop door with trembling fingers. Miss Marple lingered by the window. Outside, the sunlight hit the glass jars on the sill. They shone the same way, perfect, artificial, wrong. She touched the edge of the tablecloth, still damp with tea, still holding the faint scent of something bitter. The inspector tipped his hat. "Coming, Miss Marple?" "In a moment," she said. Her eyes stayed on that glossy cake. It looked accidental, but accidents rarely shine like that. Miss Marple carried the paper bag carefully, as if it held something alive. Inside, 2 Eccles cakes, identical to the eye, or almost. She set them side by side on her kitchen table, curtains drawn, kettle humming. Outside, the village was loud with talk, but inside it was only the soft clink of china and thought. Mrs. Bantry sat opposite her, curious as a cat. "Really, Jane? 2 cakes? That's your clue?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "My dear, it's never the cake itself. It's what it tells us." She unwrapped the first. Golden brown. Coarse sugar dusted like morning frost. Nothing odd. Then the second. It gleamed faintly, a shine too smooth for pastry. "See?" she said. Mrs. Bantry leaned closer. "Looks fresher." "Not fresher," Miss Marple replied. "Tampered." She lifted one cake toward the light. A faint scent rose. Not butter, not spice. Something sharp like polish, or spirits. Mrs. Bantry wrinkled her nose. "Smells dreadful." "Yes, that same smell was in the bakery when the man died. They said he'd choked. They said it was heat and gluttony. But heat doesn't make cakes glisten, and gluttony doesn't leave a chemical scent." Miss Marple took a clean knife and sliced each in half. The ordinary one broke flaky and soft. The shiny one resisted, like it had been sealed. A thin crust of gloss cracked under the blade. Mrs. Bantry leaned in, whispering, "You think someone painted it?" "Something like that," Miss Marple said. "Perhaps with a household liquid. To make it gleam, to make it lethal." Silence fell between them. The clock ticked. Outside, a cart rattled by, full of gossip and noise. Inside, truth was forming quietly between crumbs and scent. Miss Marple folded the 2, halves back into their wrappings, marking one with her pencil. "This one I bought myself," she said, "at 10:45. And this," she tapped the second, "came from his plate." "Mrs." Bantry's eyes widened. "Then if this one's clean," Miss Marple nodded. "The other," she said softly, "was meant to kill." The afternoon dragged itself through Street Mary Mead. Shadows stretched thin across Miss Marple's sitting room. The clock ticked with an almost deliberate calm. Her knitting lay across her lap, but she had forgotten it entirely. The yarn drooped. One needle caught mid-air. Her mind wasn't on stitches. It was on sugar, glaze, and death. She had laid the 2 paper bags neatly on the table. One marked 10:45 a.m., the other from the bakery tea room. Her handwriting small, tidy, precise, just as her thoughts needed to be. 2 cakes, 2 outcomes. One harmless, one fatal. She opened the first bag. The scent of butter, clean and warm. She closed it again, then the second. That faint polish smell rose instantly. It stung her nose, sharp and wrong. It reminded her of the small cabinet by her sideboard. Furniture polish, yellow bottle. Warning label too faint to read. A household product, not food. But how easily one could mistake one for the other, especially if one wished to. Miss Marple lifted her notebook. She had written 3 lines. 2 holes always, 3 seen, glaze too bright. Her pencil hovered, then moved again. Ring mark paper on counter. She tapped the end against her chin. That ring had meaning. A small bottle resting long enough to leave a trace. Someone had handled it carelessly. She leaned back in her chair. The lace curtains fluttered faintly, no wind, only the whisper of passing thought. Her house smelled of tea leaves and dried lavender, but her mind was still in the bakery. Mr. Senji, part common Twofold. Krill kind, steady, methodical. Mrs. Krill, sharp, proper, efficient. Too efficient, perhaps. Baal the girl, nervous but honest. 3 pairs of hands, one of which had brushed poison where sugar should have gone. Miss Marple closed her eyes. She could see the bakery clearly now. The cooling racks, the stiff brush, the dry bowl, and that pyramid of shining cakes. Yes, someone had gone back after the baking was done. The inspector would laugh at her again. He always did. He would call it fancy. He would mention heat, gluttony, weak hearts. But hearts did not stop from polish and shine. They stopped from something else entirely. She rose, went to her writing desk, and took a small envelope. Inside, a fragment of the shiny crust. She'd scraped it with her knife before wrapping the cake. A risky thing, but sometimes risks were necessary. She sealed the envelope, labeled it in her careful script. Sample EC. Evidence, she thought, though no one had asked her to collect any. The sunlight reached the edge of her table, a soft golden stripe touching the cakes like an accusation. Miss Marple stood still for a long moment. Then she put on her hat, folded her gloves into her bag, and glanced toward the clock again. It was 4:30. Shops would close soon. The chemist, always punctual, shut at 6. She looked down at the envelope one last time. The faint scent of that wrong polish lingered in the air. Miss Marple smiled, faintly grim, certain. She needed to visit the chemist before sunset. The bell above the chemist's door jingled once, then stilled. Miss Marple stepped inside, closing it quietly behind her. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and chalk dust. Shelves lined the walls. Brown bottles, neat labels, exact order. Mr. Pembroke, the chemist, looked up from his ledger. Miss Marple, he said, adjusting his spectacles. A pleasure, though rarely a social one. She smiled. You know me too well. He motioned her closer. Another mystery in the making? Perhaps. She said softly, or merely a question of polish. She set the small envelope on the counter. Inside, the scrap of shiny pastry crust. He glanced at it, curious, but cautious. Food? Of a kind, she replied, but not one I'd eat. He fetched his tools, a small tray, a pipette, a dropper of clear liquid. The air filled with quiet clicks and soft glass sounds. He worked methodically, each movement precise. Miss Marple stood still, hands folded, watching the small performance of science. He scraped a few crumbs onto the tray, added a drop of reagent. At once, the color darkened faintly yellow, then greenish-black. He frowned. Not sugar, he said, and certainly not egg glaze. What then? She asked. He hesitated. Let me be certain. He reached for another bottle, clear glass with a red seal. One more drop. The mixture hissed faintly. He nodded once. Grim. Miss Marple, this contains oxalic acid. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Used for cleaning, isn't it? Yes. Removes rust, stains, and unfortunately life. He looked up, tone heavier now. Ingested, even in small measure, it attacks the heart, causes collapse. Quick, silent. She inclined her head. I thought so. Mr. Pembroke leaned back. You thought so? Only guessed. There was a smell too sharp for sugar, too clean for oil. He closed the tray carefully. Do you wish me to inform the authorities? Not yet, she said. They would call it accident still, or mistake. And you don't? No. Mistakes rarely align so neatly with opportunity. He studied her face, as though hoping she might share the rest. But she only smiled faintly, as if the world were unfolding exactly as expected. She took the sealed envelope from the tray and slipped it back into her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Pembroke. You've confirmed what I feared." He frowned. "And what is that?" "That someone in our quiet village has learned the chemistry of convenience." She turned toward the door, gloved hand on the brass knob. Outside, the afternoon sun had dipped behind the roofs. Shadows stretched long down the lane. "Mr." Pembroke's voice followed her softly. "If eaten, Miss Marple." She paused, looking back. He finished the sentence for her. It would stop a heart in minutes. The gossip began before the church bell finished its first toll. By noon, every doorstep in street. Mary Mead had the story: a man dead at the bakery. Sudden, silent, suspicious. Mrs. Finch told it first, naturally. "Dropped like a stone," she said, rearranging her flowers. No sound, no struggle. Poison, I shouldn't wonder. By the time it reached the butcher's wife, the poor man had died twice, once from poison, once from heartbreak. Miss Marple listened quietly as she walked to the post office. The doorbell tinkled. The air inside smelled of paper, glue, and curiosity. Behind the counter, Miss Hartwell, the postmistress, was pretending not to listen to herself. "Terrible business, isn't it?" she said at once. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "You've heard, then?" "Heard. My dear, half the parish was outside the bakery before the body cooled. And what do they say? That he wasn't from here. That he'd come asking questions about Mrs. Krill's cousin. Or was it her husband's brother? Depends on who you ask." Miss Marple nodded. "And what do you think?" Miss Hartwell hesitated, her eyes darting to the door. "I think," she whispered, "he'd been here before." Quietly. "I saw him last week. Posted a letter." "To whom?" She pursed her lips. "Didn't say, but the address was local. Odd thing, that." Outside, the sound of voices thickened. The constable passed, frowning, his notebook tucked under his arm. Then came the inspector, his stride confident, his mood not. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said. "You've been busy, I hear." "Only listening," she said. "It's the village that's busy," he snorted. "With nonsense. Man had a weak heart. That's the end of it." "Perhaps," she said softly, "though the heart usually needs a reason to stop." He ignored the comment and walked on, muttering something about old ladies and poison stories. Miss Marple watched him go. His confidence was the kind she distrusted, too firm, too tidy. By tea-time, the story had grown legs. The baker was a murderer. The baker's wife was jealous. The maid had fled. Or married. Or both. At 6, the bell rang for evening prayer, and half the pews whispered instead of singing. Names, suspicions, half-formed memories, a web of words, all tangled and bright. Miss Marple sat near the back, silent. Each story added another thread, but she was watching for the one that didn't match. Rumour, she thought, always carried a fingerprint. After the hymn, Mrs. Bantry leaned close. "They say Mrs. Krill never left her house all morning." Miss Marple's eyes lifted toward the stained glass window. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "And yet," she said, "the postmistress had seen her at 8. The choir began again, but the tune felt different now. Morning again, different light. Same village, pretending nothing had happened." Miss Marple sat in her chair by the window, notebook open, pencil steady. She drew a small line for each hour of the morning before the death. 8, 9, 10, 11. Each tick marked a life moving quietly toward disaster. She murmured aloud, as if talking to the roses outside. "Mrs. Krill said she never left the house." Tap of pencil. Yet the postmistress saw her at 8. She tapped again. "Mr. Krill baked until 10. Never left the kitchen." Pause. "But he did send young Barl to the chemist, didn't he?" Her pencil circled the word chemist. That word always made her pause now. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Bantry arrived with a tin of biscuits and a dozen more rumours. "Jane, they're saying the baker's wife fainted at the inquest. Imagine that." Miss Marple smiled politely. "Did she now?" Mrs. Bantry leaned forward. "And that Barl girl, she's gone back to her aunt's in Much Benham. Sudden visit. No warning. Miss Marple stirred her tea. People run when frightened. Sometimes for guilt. Sometimes for fear of gossip. Mrs. Bantry sighed. I'd run too, if everyone thought I'd poisoned a customer. Miss Marple's tone was mild. But no one said she baked the cakes. Silence stretched. Mrs. Bantry frowned. No, but she was at the chemist that morning. I heard it from Mr. Pembroke himself. Miss Marple's hand stilled on the cup. Indeed. Mrs. Bantry nodded, pleased to be helpful. She said she needed cleaning fluid for the pastry brush. Some polish, or something. Miss Marple set her cup down very carefully. The spoon trembled once before resting still. Polish, she repeated. How practical. Her eyes went to her notes. Timeline again. 8 o'clock, Mrs. Krill seen outside. 9 bar sent to chemist. 10 bakery doors open. 11 man arrives. 11:15 collapse. She traced the sequence slowly, almost tenderly. 2 women, she whispered. 1 with motive, 1 with movement. Mrs. Bantry tilted her head. What's that, Jane? Nothing, my dear, merely thinking aloud. When her friend left, Miss Marple took her hat from the hook and walked to the lane. At the end, she paused before the bakery. Closed. A single paper notice pinned to the door. By order of the police. She turned the corner to the chemist's. Inside, Mr. Pembroke looked nervous. Miss Marple, if you've come about that girl. She raised a hand. No blame, Mr. Pembroke. Only clarity. He hesitated, then sighed. She came in that morning. Bought a small bottle, said it was for cleaning trays. Paid in cash. Left quickly. He frowned. I thought nothing of it, till later. Miss Marple nodded. Do you recall the bottle? He pointed to a shelf. 3rd row. Yellow label. The same polish he'd tested for her. She smiled faintly. Of course. She thanked him, stepped back into the sunlight, and drew her shawl closer. Some errands were innocent. Some were simply well hidden. And this one, a small package. No one was meant to notice. The bakery smelled of silence. Not bread, not warmth, just the faint cold of dust and endings. The inspector unlocked the door with a frown. Not sure what good this will do, he muttered. Miss Marple followed, quiet, calm, eyes alert. Goodness, she said softly. It looks almost untouched. The counters gleamed. Too clean. The windows shone. The floor had been scrubbed. Mr. Krill and his wife stood behind the counter like mannequins. Neither spoke. Routine inspection, the inspector said briskly. Just confirming statements. He flipped open his notebook, pretending not to glance at Miss Marple. But she noticed. She moved slowly through the room. Every sound, the scrape of her heel, the hum of the ceiling fan felt louder than it should. She touched nothing but looked at everything. The tray rack by the oven. Empty. The long counter. Wiped clean but not perfect. A faint streak caught her eye, one narrow line darker than the rest. She bent closer. Soap residue, the inspector said quickly. Or polish, she murmured. He sighed. Not that again. She didn't answer. On the wall behind the till hung 3 hooks for aprons. Only 2 were filled. She pointed. Who used the 3rd? Mrs. Krill blinked. No one, I think. We only keep extras. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Extras rarely hang between husband and wife. Mr. Krill shifted. It was the girl's apron, he said. Barles. Still here? He hesitated. No. She took it when she left. Miss Marple walked toward the shelf beside the window. A jar sat there, flour dusted on its lid, a ring beneath it darker than the wood around it. She lifted the jar slightly. The mark was perfect, circular, fresh. Same diameter as a polish bottle, she said quietly. The inspector frowned. Coincidence. Perhaps, but even coincidences leave traces. She turned to the table where the man had fallen. The cloth was gone, but the shadow of the stain remained faintly in the grain. 2 cups had sat there, 2 plates. Only 1 spoon rested now in the drawer. Odd, she said. What is? 2 people drinking tea, but 1 spoon left behind. The inspector rubbed his chin. Could have been cleared. She nodded, or pocketed. Mrs. Krill's hands tightened around her handkerchief. A small sound escaped her half-breath, half-tremor. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to her, then back to the table. The sugar bowl sat slightly off-center, too close to where the man had Saturday. She tilted her head. Did he serve himself? She asked quietly. Mrs. Krill shook her head. I know. I did. Miss Marple stepped back, eyes sweeping over every detail one last time. The streak, the hooks, the jar ring, the missing spoon. It was all so neat, too neat. She turned toward the inspector. Her voice was soft, but certain. There were 3 marks, she said. He looked puzzled. 3 what? Her eyes stayed on the table. There were 3 marks, she repeated. There should have been 2. The morning light slanted through the bakery windows again, soft, but colder now. It fell across the counter, catching on the trays that had been stacked against the wall. Miss Marple stood before them, quiet, watchful. Her eyes moved like a clock, hands slow, exact, deliberate. The inspector had grown restless. Honestly, Miss Marple, how long can one look at empty tins? She smiled faintly. As long as it takes to see what no one else has. She lifted one tray, then another, both identical, round, shallow, clean. But when she reached the third, she paused. Her fingertip brushed the metal surface, a faint dent, tiny, almost invisible. This one baked the poisoned cake, she said softly. Mr. Krill blinked. You can't tell that by looking. Can't I? She asked. She pointed. Here, 3 holes in the edge. See them? He squinted. Steam vents. Every tray's got 2. Yes, 2, she said calmly. But this one has 3. The inspector stepped closer. Manufacturing floor? Unlikely, Miss Marple murmured. Look at the edge. See the color? That 3rd hole was made later. The metal's brighter, sharper. Mr. Krill frowned, running a floury hand through his hair. I didn't do that. I never touched the trays after baking. Who does? She asked. His wife's voice cut through the silence. I clean them, she said. Always have. Her tone was steady, but her hands twisted the handkerchief tight. Miss Marple tilted her head. With what, may I ask? A bit of soap and hot water, sometimes polish, if they dull. Polish, Miss Marple echoed softly. Such a useful thing, isn't it? Brightens everything. The inspector scratched his neck. So what? A scratch in a tray and some polish? Doesn't make murder? No, Miss Marple agreed. But it makes method. She set the tray down and reached for one of the unbaked doughs cooling on the rack. Notice the pattern, she said. When you brush glaze, you use a steady hand. 2 strokes left-right. The shine forms evenly. She looked up. And yet the cake that killed him had a patch of double gloss near the center. Not brushed, poured. Mr. Krill stared. That's impossible. You can't pour on glaze after baking. No, she said gently. Not if it's egg glaze, but if it's liquid polish. He stepped back, pale. She'd never... Mrs. Krill's voice broke in sharply. You're saying I killed a man over pastry? Miss Marple didn't answer. She just turned the tray in her hands again, the light glinting across the new hole. This hole, she said, was made to drain. Someone poured something through it while the cakes cooled. The pattern's wrong because the liquid spread unevenly. The inspector's eyes widened. You mean... Yes, Miss Marple said. Someone changed them. Her gaze lingered on the tray, then rose slowly to Mrs. Krill. After they cooled, Mrs. Krill did not cry, not once. Not even when the inspector spoke her name in that careful, final tone. She stood behind the counter, neat as always. Apron pressed, collar straight. Her calmness unsettled the room more than tears ever could. I only ever helped, she said softly. Everyone knows that. Her voice was gentle, almost weary. Miss Marple said nothing. Mr. Krill sat in the corner, his hands trembling around a handkerchief. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders folded in. She ran the shop, he murmured. Did all the books. I only baked. The inspector cleared his throat. And who handled the accounts? Lydia did, Mr. Krill said. Always Lydia. Miss Marple's eyes flicked toward her. The woman's stillness was extraordinarily measured, elegant, deliberate. Even now she did not fidget. Her gaze met Miss Marple's directly, as if daring her to find fault. You knew the man who died, Miss Marple said. It wasn't a question. Mrs. Krill hesitated just long enough to be honest. He was an accountant, she said. From the supply firm. He came last year when we refinanced. And again? Yes, she admitted. A few times. He said there'd been a miscalculation, that we owed more than we'd thought. Mr. Krill looked up sharply. You never told me that. It wasn't worth worrying you, she said evenly. I meant to fix it quietly. Miss Marple's voice was mild. Fix it? Or hide it? A flicker, small but real, crossed Mrs. Krill's face. She took a slow breath. He was threatening us. Said he'd report the figures. That we'd lose the shop. So you helped him, Miss Marple said. Tea, a smile, a seat by the window. Mrs. Krill's lips pressed thin. I did what any wife would do. I protected my home. The inspector spoke up. By feeding him polish? She didn't flinch. I didn't mean to kill him, she whispered. Only to frighten him. A few drops on the glaze just to make him ill. To stop him coming back. Mr. Krill buried his face in his hands. Good Lord, Lydia. Miss Marple's expression softened slightly, but her tone stayed steady. Kindness, Mrs. Krill, is a curious thing. It often wears a mask. Sometimes it looks like protection, sometimes like control, and sometimes— She glanced toward the counter where the cakes had once gleamed. It looks like polish on pastry. Mrs. Krill's eyes filled, but no tears fell. I didn't want him dead, she said again. I believe you, Miss Marple said, but poison rarely stops at intention. The inspector signaled to the constable. Mrs. Krill lifted her chin. I'd have done it again, she murmured. He meant to ruin us. Miss Marple turned away. Outside, the village bell began its slow evening toll. She paused at the doorway, looking back once more at the woman who had kept everything so clean, so proper, so perfect. Helpful hands, she thought, are the most dangerous kind. The inspector hated paperwork almost as much as he hated being wrong, but this time both waited for him. He sat at the bakery table, notes scattered, Miss Marple across from him like a quiet conscience. Let's go. Over it again, he muttered. She nodded. We must. He traced the timeline with his pencil. 8 a.m. Mrs. Krill, seen outside by the postmistress. 9 a bottle bought by the maid. 10 the cakes cooled. 11:15 death. He tapped the page. It fits. Barely. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the apron folded neatly in the evidence bag. Barely, she echoed. But truth rarely fits neatly. Lies do. He frowned. You're saying there's more? She pointed to the apron. That stain. It's small, but darker than polish. Look closely. He leaned in, squinting. Rust, perhaps. No, I think not. Her tone was light, but certain. That's oxalic acid burn. The fabric's eaten slightly. See the edge? Too clean for rust. Too cruel for water. He sat back. So she spilled some while cleaning. Miss Marple nodded. Or while pouring. Mr. Krill shuffled nearby, pale and trembling. She told me she polished the trays. Said the brush was old. I never questioned it. You trusted her, Miss Marple said gently. That's the easiest lie of all the one people live inside. The inspector sighed. We found the bottle empty, thrown behind the bins. Miss Marple's eyes brightened faintly. Behind, not inside. Hidden in haste, not guilt. Meaning? She panicked. Yes, but she believed she'd done something small, not murder. She wanted to erase the mark, not the act. He rubbed his temples. You make it sound tidy. It isn't, she said. Tidy people leave the worst messes. They fold their sins neatly, label them help, and put them away on the top shelf. He stared at her for a moment. You speak from experience? She smiled faintly. from observation. She reached for the stack of ledgers beside the till. Her motive began here, she said. Money, reputation, fear of losing the shop. The dead man missed her. Dawn wasn't a stranger. He'd been threatening her for weeks. She wrote him letters, pleading. You'll find one tucked between these pages. He opened the ledger. There it was, creased, smudged, desperate. If you tell him, it ruins everything. I'll handle it my way. He whistled softly. That's intent. Miss Marple shook her head. That's pride. Intent comes later. He folded the note carefully. So she mixed the polish with the glaze, brushed it wrong, served it right, Miss Marple added, and watched him eat, believing she'd taught him fear. Outside, a dog barked, sharp and sudden. The sound cut the air, leaving stillness behind. The inspector looked up. Remarkable how far lies travel in a small place. Yes, she said softly. They walk with us to church, hide in our flour tins, and sit quietly at tea. She turned her gaze to the apron one last time. The stain caught the light, dull and persistent. Every lie, Miss Marple said, it seems, leaves a mark. Chairs scraped softly. The room settled. Miss Marple placed both cakes on the table, one dull, one faintly bright. She folded her hands. Let us begin, she said. First the morning, 8 o'clock. Mrs. Krill is seen outside. Not long, just enough to fetch air, or to check the lane. She tells no one. 9 o'clock. Bal goes to the chemist, buys a small bottle, says it's for cleaning trays, pays in cash, leaves quickly. 10 o'clock. Cakes cool on the rack. Trays are clean, brush is stiff. Egg glaze has already been used. The bowl is dry. She touched the dented tray. Here is the new hole. Not factory. Made. Bright edge. Fresh cut. A drain. Someone returns to the rack. Not the baker. He is in the oven room. Steam, noise, flour, a good alibi. Someone takes the bottle, stands by this tray, tips it, lets the liquid pass through, over the cake beneath. A small pour, just enough to shine. Miss, Marple lifted the bright half-cake. See this thin shell? This is not brushed. It is sealed. She looked to Mrs. Krill. Then the table is set. Window seat. Best light. Cup and saucer. Sugar moved closer than usual. Spoon. Misplaced. The man arrives. He is expected. He asks about figures. He asks about what he wrote last week. He wants a decision. He wants it today. Tea is poured. Cake is served. No ceremony. No delay. He eats. He smiles. He speaks once. He falls. Miss Marple's voice stayed gentle. Dr. Haydock is called. He finds a quiet end. The inspector calls it a heart. But the bakery smells wrong. Too clean. Too sharp. She set down the cake and took the apron from the bag. Here is the mark. Oxalic acid burns fabric. Polish dulls cotton. This spot does both. She turned to the dented tray again. 3 holes. 2 standard. 1 new. Why a third? To drain excess. To avoid a puddle. To keep the gloss even. A murmur ran through the room. Mr. Krill swallowed hard. I never asked for polish, he said. I never told her to do it. Mrs. Krill's hands were steady, but her mouth trembled. I meant to frighten him, she whispered. Just a lesson. A warning. He would have ruined us. Miss Marple nodded once. Fear is tidy in its own mind. It counts itself as help. She placed the knife between the cake halves. Observe the center. Double sheen. The pour gathered here. Not by brush, by gravity. The bottle is emptied. Not thrown away properly. Hidden behind the bins. Hasty. Not thorough. She turned, addressing the inspector. Your timeline stands, motive stands, method stands. It is not only what she did, it is how she believed it. Small thing, small dose, small harm. Silence held for a long breath. Outside, a cart rattled past. A dog barked once. The sound faded. Mrs. Krill's voice cracked. He threatened my husband. He mocked our work. He called me foolish. I wanted him to stop. Miss Marple's gaze softened. Pride is a fierce custodian, she said. It guards the door. It locks from the inside. She closed her notebook. The sequence is complete. Errand, pour, shine, serve, collapse. Her eyes moved back to the crumbs, to the currants glistening inside the cut. Only one question remained: why the seeds? The bakery was still. Not silent, but holding that strange hush that follows truth too long ignored. Miss Marple sat at the table once more. Before her lay the ledger, the apron, the 2 halves of cake, and beside them a single small dish. Inside it 3 black currant seeds. She touched one lightly with the tip of her finger. "They never belong to the Glaze," she said quietly. The inspector looked puzzled. "Seeds? You mean those little things in the filling?" "Yes, in the filling. But these," she pointed again, "were on top." Mr. Krill's voice was hoarse. "Seeds end up everywhere, Miss Marple. We use handfuls." She nodded slowly. "Do you? Or did your wife?" He swallowed hard. "She liked to decorate. Said they gave texture." Miss Marple's eyes stayed on the dish. "She gave something else, too." The inspector leaned forward. "What do the seeds prove?" "Pattern," she said softly. "They prove pattern." She picked one up and placed it beside the cake slice. When she poured the liquid polish, she brushed away the top. Then, to disguise the missing glaze marks, she pressed a few currant seeds across the surface, tiny, uneven, like careless baking. She paused. But she was never careless. And the seeds came from a different batch, dried, not fresh. Her tone was quiet, but final. The perfect baker made a perfect mistake. The inspector scribbled in his notebook. "So those seeds mean she tampered with it?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "And she did so, carefully enough that no one would question the shine." Mr. Krill stared at the table. "She told me the polish smell was nothing. I believed her." Miss Marple's voice softened. "Belief is a comfortable blindness, Mr. Krill. It saves us from seeing what's in front of us." "Mrs." Krill sat in the corner, motionless, pale, her hands folded like folded linen. She spoke without raising her head. "I loved this shop," she said. "Every loaf, every pie. I kept it spotless." He came and laughed at that, said I cared more for my floor than for my husband. Her voice broke. He was right. I wanted perfection. I wanted respect. I wanted to show that a woman could hold everything steady. Miss Marple nodded gently. "And so you did. Even murder became part of your order." Mrs. Krill looked up, eyes empty. "It wasn't hatred," she whispered. "No," Miss Marple said softly. "It was pride." The inspector closed his book. The constable stood by the door. Outside, the bell in the church tower began to chime. Miss Marple gathered the small dish of seeds and placed it inside the evidence bag. She turned once more toward the light breaking through the bakery window, her voice barely above a breath. "It wasn't hatred," she said again. "It was pride, disguised as love." Rain tapped softly on the window, a steady rhythm, gentle, familiar. Miss Marple poured her tea. Steam curled up in delicate rings. The house was warm again. The village, quiet. On the table lay her notebook, closed at last. The case was over, but her thoughts were not. Outside, sparrows argued over crumbs on the path. Life went on, as it always did. Even after death, even after truth. She stirred her tea slowly. The sound of the spoon against porcelain felt louder than usual. Each turn brought her mind back to Lydia Krill, a tidy woman, a dutiful wife, and, under all that polish, a storm of pride and fear. Miss Marple sighed softly. "People rarely mean to be wicked," she said aloud. "They simply refuse to see themselves." The clock struck 5. The rain eased. A faint patch of sunlight touched the rim of her cup. She remembered Mrs. Krill's voice calm, almost kind. "I only wanted to help." Yes, help can poison as surely as hate. She looked out across the garden. The roses bowed beneath the rain. One petal fell, soundless, onto the path. Her gaze lingered there. "People don't kill for evil," she murmured. "They kill to hide from themselves." She sipped her tea. The flavor was simple, no sugar, no lemon, just warmth and quiet. From the street came a distant bell, then the faint rattle of a cart, wheels slick on wet cobbles. Ordinary sounds, comforting ones. And yet, in that comfort, she always heard the whisper of the next mystery, because human nature never rests. It brews quietly, like tea left too long in the pot. She smiled faintly. Somewhere, someone would lie again. Somewhere, another secret would slip through the cracks of kindness. Miss Marple set down her cup. The kettle hissed, ready to boil again. The air filled with that familiar sound, the sound of beginnings disguised as endings. She reached for her notebook once more. A clean page waited. Blank. Expectant. And somewhere, she said softly, almost to the rain, another kettle begins to boil. Thank you for joining us tonight on The Curious Case. It's always a pleasure to share another quiet mystery with you. Tell me which clue gave it away first for you. Was it the shine on the cake, the missing spoon, or the wrong seed? Share your thoughts down in the comments. I love reading your theories. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the little bell so you'll know when the next kettle begins to boil. Until next time, keep your tea warm and your curiosity warmer. Because in every village, behind every friendly smile, there's always another secret waiting to be discovered.